going to have to answer when you begin your deliberations. The first one is, has the state proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Daniel Tate killed Olivia McKay or assisted someone else in doing so? Secondly, you're going to have to decide, has the state proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Daniel Tate hid Olivia McKay's corpse or assisted someone in doing so? Now, you'll notice I didn't say anything about count number 3. That's the operating a vehicle without an owner's consent. We will concede and agree that there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt for that offense. The important thing, though, to keep in mind is that driving someone's car without their permission does not mean that you killed that person. And that's what the state's trying to do here. They're trying to say those two things are absolutely linked, and that's not the case. So let's look at the physical evidence, or the lack of physical evidence. There is no physical evidence to establish that Daniel Tate killed Olivia McKay. There's not DNA on Miss McKay. There's not her DNA on Mr. Tate or any of his property. What we have, though, is a fingerprint of Jamari Cook on one of the plastic bags that is found on Olivia McKay's body. Now, the state wants you to believe, and they have this explanation that Jamari Cook conveniently provides to say, well, Daniel Tate was wearing these gloves. And the state has sort of hinted to you that the gloves that are found at Patsy Tate's house, well, those are those same gloves. Those are the ones that Jamari Cook's talking about. Those gloves have never been tested to determine who was wearing them. You were provided with a stipulation or an agreement between the parties that certain items were tested at the state crime lab. You'll likely remember that that was not one of those items that was indicated that had been processed in any way. And you also heard from Officer Wiedner that when he puts those gloves on, he sweats a lot. He gets a lot of sweat going. That would allow for, that's certainly a good way to test for DNA, never tested. Jamari Cook doesn't say anything about these gloves in August. He doesn't think to mention to Detective Duffy, when they talk numerous times about these plastic garbage bags, he doesn't say, yeah, and you know what, Daniel Tate had some gloves on. Yes, he wasn't specifically asked, but that's something that's really going to stick out in your mind. You're not going to say, well, he also had these gloves that he brought with him, and he put them on. So whether he's asked directly or not, he should remember that, and he would have said something if that were the truth. And let's talk about some of the inconsistencies that are in Jamari Cook's statement to the police. He says that Daniel Tate puts his knee into Olivia McKay's back and he holds her down into water. He then says that he takes some type of cloth, puts it around her neck, again with his knee in her back, and is pulling her body and sort of pulling it back. What he describes requires a lot of force, and it's going to create a lot of pressure on someone's back as you're using that to sort of push down on and do these things. The medical examiner says, I don't see any injuries to her back. I don't see any type of big contusions or anything like that. We also know that there's not any type of ligature mark. There's no type of marking on her neck. And you heard the testimony of the medical examiner about what a ligature is, what a ligature furrow is. He doesn't see any signs of that. Although we have Jamari Cook saying he puts this thing around her neck and he pulls with great force. There's no loss of hair on Olivia McKay when she's examined. We have Jamari Cook saying he grabbed her by her hair up out of the water. And then to go back to these garbage bags. The state's explanation for why Daniel Tate has no fingerprints or anything on these bags is when they get out to Mount Pleasant, he puts these gloves on, and that's why they're not there. Well, they're in his backpack, so somehow they've got to get into his backpack. He's got to pick them up from wherever he picks them up from. If you believe the state's theory, it's at his grandmother's house, and puts them into his bag, but doesn't leave any type of fingerprints or anything on them. The state believes that Daniel Tate killed Olivia McKay so that he could take her car. You did hear, though, Detective Duffy, who testified yesterday, and he said that Mr. Cook never said that to him. Mr. Cook never told him on August 4th that Daniel Tate said that he killed Olivia McKay for her car. Now, it got a little bit tedious as we went through this testimony about what Mr. Cook said on August 3rd. But on August 3rd, Jamari tells the Mount Pleasant detectives, he says, Danny choked her. Officer says, why? He says, I don't know. He did tell me he was going to take her car, though. So he's not saying, I know that he's told me he killed her because he was going to take her car. They're two separate things. I don't know why he killed her. And then number two is he did tell me he was going to take her car. This is a very extreme measure to go to take someone's car. There's a variety of ways in which you could steal someone's car, and certainly you could just take one off the street. And this car is not a terribly valuable car. The state is indicating that they believe that Daniel Tate's trying to sell it to Raven Deckard for $500. This is a pretty extreme act to do for $500. And supposedly, Mr. Tate's kind of plan, as conveyed to Susie Bagdala, is he's going to grip a steamer or two and get a job. And as far as the state's concerned, grip a steamer means you're going to kill someone and take their car. So he's going to go out and he's going to kill two people, take a couple of cars, and then he's going to go get a job and life goes on. That's the plan for his life going forward. But Jamari Cook said grip a steamer means to obtain a stolen car. It doesn't mean anything about killing someone. We also know that the police found some money in Olivia McKay's property. Hadn't been taken. All of the other items had not been taken, had not been sold. So the theory is, I think, that you get rid of the property that's in the car, I guess maybe to avoid being caught, but instead you hold on to this car and you message a bunch of people about it. It's inconsistent. You're going to hide your tracks in one way, and then you're going to leave this electronic record the other. And we know from the Meet Me messages that Daniel Tate's interest was in sex. He sent some pretty forthright messages indicating his desire to have sex. And certainly if that's your plan, your desire, killing someone and what follows next is certainly not going to get you to that end. Jamari Cook says he saw Daniel Tate kill Olivia McKay. That does not mean that that's true. He has every incentive to start pointing the finger at someone else. He has everything to gain, and he has nothing to lose by doing that. And the police are happy with Jamari. He's told, you're worth saving. We've talked to the district attorney. They want to give you a chance to help yourself, give you a chance to get out in front of this. It's pretty clear at this point he's got people on his side. And by telling them, I can clear up this story and I'll tell you that Daniel Tate is who killed her, and now case solved, he's getting positive reinforcement about that. And this is all done, the sides are chosen before there's any type of physical evidence. The police don't know anything about fingerprints or DNA, and they pick their sides. And Jamari is not an idiot. I mean, it doesn't take much brain power to figure out, I got to get out in front of this. I got to give the police someone, and I'm certainly not going to say that it's me. And so if he gives them Daniel, then he's off the hook. Then they're going to stop. They're not going to look at him anymore, and that's what happened. They're not going to look to see, maybe there's some evidence out there to show that Jamari Cook's the one who did it. They're not going to look at trying to get that phone that mysteriously disappears between July 23rd and when he meets with the police on August 3rd. And that's what happened here. They didn't keep looking at that. And Jamari had time to get his story straight. So he knows that Daniel Tate has been arrested and been taken down to the police department. And the police say to him, well, we'd like to talk to you if you get around to it. When you're ready, come and see us and talk to us. And so he does. He figures out when he's going to be ready to go, gets his story straight, and he goes down there. He had plenty of time to come up with a story and plenty of time to focus it on Daniel Tate. And we also know Jamari Cook is significantly bigger than Daniel Tate. He's bigger than most people. And the state and I, not surprisingly, we have a disagreement about what the significance of that is. But you've also seen Daniel Tate. He's not a big guy. It's about average height, average build. Jamari Cook's the size of a lineman. But to say that we know that Jamari Cook, well, he just pick up the body and just walk with it, I think is an exaggeration. But it certainly would be difficult for someone of Daniel Tate's size to do what is being alleged here. To put an arm around someone, to throw them down into the ground, to drag their body uphill 190 pounds, and to do that a day after he'd been taken to the hospital in an ambulance. It's for you to decide. It's not up to Mr. Gravely and I. It's up to you to decide based on the evidence what you think. Daniel did give some statements to the police, concede that they're confusing. Detective Duffy said that Mr. Tate had indicated that he had been drinking alcohol on that night, which obviously affects, we all sort of know from experience, can affect your memory and your kind of understanding of what happened. But we also know that he and Jamari were very close. And just because Jamari turns on Daniel Tate doesn't mean that the same is true in the reverse. Doesn't mean that Daniel Tate would automatically turn on his friend. We talked about the social media. You saw the messages. And Jamari Cook said, yeah, I sent messages from Daniel Tate's social media accounts. Now, you also know that just from text messages, things like that, there's no way to know exactly who you're communicating with. You can't see that person. So it's reason to at least be skeptical of those messages. The state brought up 3 of Daniel Tate's ex-girlfriends. Well, I guess 4 of them, if you count Raven Deckard. And they testified about Daniel's interest to engage in choking while they were having sex. And it was limited specifically to sex. There's no indication of any type of sexual assault on Olivia McKay. And we all know that people do things while they're having sex that they certainly don't just walk out on the street and do in public. Samantha Whitaker, Amanda Hanneman testified that Daniel had choked them. Samantha described Daniel using one hand to do that. She said only sometimes did she have trouble breathing while that occurred. Not at all the same from what the state is alleging here occurred on the beach. And Amanda Hanneman testified that Daniel Tate had choked her, but agreed that in her statement that she gave in September that that's not what she said. Now, you saw the 3 young women testify. You saw their demeanor, had a chance to assess their credibility, the inconsistencies that some of them gave. But the most interesting thing was it was like this was no big deal. None of this was very noteworthy to any of them. Raven Deckard, though, was never asked about any of this stuff, who's a more recent sexual partner of Mr. Tate's. Let's talk about the new information that Jamari Cook has now remembered since he talked with the police just 7 to 10 days after this supposedly occurred. He now says, well, Daniel told Olivia and I that we needed to go down by the band shell because we had to meet someone who owed him money. Never said before. Now says, well, Daniel drove Olivia's car onto the grass before putting her body in the trunk. Talks about the wearing gloves. Never said before that he had gone to the Knights Inn on July 24th and threw away property out of Olivia McKay's car. Didn't say anything back in August about this cover story that they come up with supposedly that day on August 3rd. Doesn't say anything about, yeah, you know, a little earlier we were on our way, we were down in Illinois trying to get away. Doesn't say anything about throwing out Olivia McKay's phone from the vehicle, although he is asked specifically about that on a number of occasions. and says nothing about the property on Washington Road, although he is asked about that on numerous specific occasions. And so he lied about that. I mean, he knew that property, or he's coming in here and saying that's what happened to it, but when asked directly, he says nothing. Now, the state went through, well, he wasn't asked specifically those things, and Mr. Gravely shared a story from his own personal experience. Jamari Cook's being questioned about a homicide. He's not being asked to recount the cruise that he took. This is as serious as it gets. And if someone doesn't ask Jamari Cook a specific question, doesn't say, was Daniel Tate wearing gloves on that day? Jamari Cook doesn't think during the 3 times that he's being asked about his garbage bags to say, yeah, and he had on these blue gloves. It's absurd. He doesn't think about to say, we went down to Illinois, or to say, well, the reason I wasn't truthful with you in the beginning is because Daniel and I came up with this cover story. He's not going to say that unless they ask him and say, hey, when you were in Columbus Park earlier today, did you come up with a cover story with Daniel Tate? Jamari Cook continued to lie, and he continued to lie to save himself. He kept things out of his statements that he gave to the police August 3rd and August 4th. He made statements that were false. And Detective Haleen, who interviewed him on August 3rd, described him as being very anxious, having poor eye contact, and giving brief responses. And we know from our personal experiences, we've run across people who are lying to us. Those are certainly things that we are looking for when we think someone's lying. But the state argues, well, after Jamari Cook found out that Daniel Tate was down by the beach, he got religion and he got truthful. But that's not what happened. And you sat through the testimony and you know that's not what happened. But think about it from another perspective, is that if Jamari Cook thinks that Daniel Tate's down at the beach and he's telling the truth, and that truth is that Jamari Cook did this, then Jamari Cook goes up into, well, then now I got to point the finger at him and I got to say that he did it because he's telling them the truth. He's going to tell them that I did it. And we talked about Jamari's phone that he had on July 23rd and can't be found, and maybe it's broken or maybe he lost it, and he has no memory of it. Now, this is someone who's very transient lifestyle. A phone is a tool to someone in that predicament. And in this day and age, our phones become very important to us. We're going to know what happened to it. He can't provide any type of answer. The state presented a rather extensive Facebook conversation between Mr. Tate and Tamara. And Daniel Tate says, there's something important I need to tell you. And it's sort of built up as he's got this big, big secret. And the state sets up this storyline. He's got this big secret to tell her, but there's no ending to it. It doesn't end with a confession. And Tamara's not called to come into court. So think about whether this story ends the way that the state wants it to end. But Daniel also says to Tamara, don't say anything in front of Jay. Well, Mr. Gravely talked about Daniel Tate and Jamari, they're very loyal. If Daniel Tate's going to go and do this, this is the person he wants there, this person who's loyal to him, who can be trusted. But Daniel's saying to Tamara, don't say anything about this in front of Jamari. Well, if Jamari was there, Jamari was involved, who cares if Jamari hears about it or has talked about it? But if Jamari Cook is the one who kills Olivia McKay, then you're certainly not going to want to let him know you're talking to Tamara about it. And Jamari Cook does nothing. On the beach, he does nothing to intervene when he says that Daniel Tate is killing Olivia McKay. He sat there, he listened to music, he was in shock, but his instinct doesn't kick in to save someone. And he says that she's being strangled, she's not moving, she's not fighting. It doesn't make sense. And then when he comes into court, his story about how far away he was, now it's more distance. Well, I said it was about 10 feet back in August, but now that I've had some time to think about it, I know that I was further away. It's a way for him to explain why he didn't do anything. And he said that he was worried that if Olivia McKay got up, then he and Daniel would both go to jail. And he didn't want to save her because he knew that if she was still living, she would be a witness against him. But if he didn't do anything wrong, why doesn't he intervene? And let's think about the power that the state of Wisconsin has over Jamari Cook. He is in a very serious situation. And there are numerous pieces of information that he doesn't share when he meets with law enforcement in August of 2017. And certain things that he says for the first time in court. And then when asked about that, says, well, he had also told some of those previously to the district attorney in some type of meeting between them. He's trying to help the DA fill in the holes. Well, my fingerprints are on the garbage bag, but not Daniel's. Okay, well, that's kind of a problem. Well, I know what. I'll tell them he had these gloves. And so the only physical evidence that sort of is with the body belongs to Jamari Cook. But at this point in the process, the state has already chosen Jamari Cook as the cooperator, Daniel Tate's the monster. And so they got to figure out there's got to be a way to fix this problem now that our cooperating witness is the only one who's got physical evidence linked to this body. And Jamari's looking for a way out because, as I said, he is in some serious trouble. And he has everything to gain by blaming Daniel Tate. If he piles more and more stuff on, it's going to be better for him. So our job as the defense in this case is not to provide you with all the answers, and I'll be honest that I can't. It's not our job to prove how Olivia McKay died. It's not our job to say who did it, why they did it. And it's not our job to prove that Jamari Cook did it. It's the state's job, and it's the state's burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge instructed you about reasonable doubt, and there's just a couple things I wanted to draw your attention to. But in that instruction, it indicates that it's the state's burden to establish every fact necessary to constitute guilt. And it goes on to say that if you can reconcile the evidence upon any reasonable hypothesis consistent with the defendant's innocence, you should do so and return a verdict of not guilty. And it talks about that doubt, in reasonable doubt, it means that such a doubt as would cause a person of ordinary prudence to pause or hesitate when called upon to act in the most important affairs of life. We talked about what those doubts are, what those reasonable doubts are in this case. And the fact that Jamari Cook alone killed Olivia McKay is a reasonable hypothesis that is consistent with Daniel Tate's innocence. Your decision is not, do you think it's more likely that Daniel Tate killed Olivia McKay or that Jamari Cook killed her? Your job is to decide whether the state has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Whether Daniel Tate alone or assisted someone in killing her, and whether he alone or assisting someone else hid her body. It is our contention the state has not proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and we ask you to find Mr. Tate not guilty of counts 1 and 2. Thank you.
Thank you,